We appreciate all of the guests who have appeared on our show and sincerely thank them for providing you, our audience, with useful information. However, the advice our guests provide is theirs, and we encourage you to seek out a professional if you have specific questions about any topic we cover on the Crushing Debt podcast. Back for another episode of the Crushing Debt podcast, attorney Christie Arkovich.
Welcome to the Crushing Debt Podcast with your host, Florida attorney 𝘾𝙗𝙧𝙞𝙀, where our goal is to help you get rid of the financial bullies in your life.
So welcome back to this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast. I have a guest with me again this week, attorney Christie Arkovich. Now, you all, if you are regular listeners, will remember Christie from episode 50, where she talked about student loans and how to negotiate away student loans using bankruptcy, using non-bankruptcy. And then you'll remember her from another episode just recently here where we talked about public service loan forgiveness programs and how that works and how Navient it may not be 100% honest with student loan borrowers, but we had some other things we wanted to talk about and we ran out of time. So I wanted to do another episode of the podcast, this time talking about two things in particular. First is some of the Parent Plus loans and some of the ways that we can deal with those, negotiate with those, whatever. And then the one that's even more interesting to me is I heard about Fannie Mae that has a new program out where they will wrap your student loans into your home mortgage. And I have some big problems with that one, but I want to hear what Christie has to say. But before we get there, before we start bashing Fannie Mae and refinances, Parent Plus loans. Parent Plus loans, if I'm right, and correct me if I'm wrong, but those are loans where the child wants to go to school and the parent borrows so the child can go to school. Is that?
Yes, essentially, because tuition costs have gone up so much in the last decade, a lot of times the federal eligibility for funds isn't quite high enough to pay all the tuition. And so the student can either take out private loans or their parents might be able to get a federal Parent Plus loan. The student isn't liable, just the parent is.
I think my wife has one of those, as a matter of fact, where her mom is the one responsible to repay it, but it was for my wife to go to college. Yeah,
they've become more popular in the last decade, but they're very problematic because unlike the student who is going to have a whole career in front of them, they might have 30, 40 years of their working life in front of them, making a lot of money, being able to pay that student loan back, hopefully. You have a parent whose credit isn't really taken into account when they get the loan. We don't know how old they are. A lot of times it's grandparents taking out these loans. And so they may not have that longevity of a working employment years to be able to make payments on the loans. And unfortunately, a lot of people also didn't think they were going to have to repay those. Their students, their children have a verbal agreement with many parents that they were going to repay these loans, but they haven't been able to get the jobs to do so. Either they've not been able to find work or they found work that just doesn't pay enough to pay all these student loans back. So we have a very high default rate. Yeah, and from the student loan company perspective, mom or dad or grandma or grandpa, whoever is the borrower. So the fact that the student didn't get a job that would allow them to pay back the loan, at least prior, really hasn't been a concern of the student loan company, right? No, the student loan company has someone on the hook. They have a parent or a grandparent that had basically borne the responsibility of repaying this loan. So to them, it doesn't matter if the student was able to obtain work or not.
So what are some ways we can negotiate and help out on a Parent Plus loan?
Sure. Well, with federal loans, they don't actually negotiate or settle like a private loan. But what they do have is some very, very good income-based programs with debt forgiveness. And so one of the things I wanted to raise awareness for, and why I asked that you might be interested in sharing this with your listeners, is that a lot of folks, they'll call into their servicer and they're told, well, you don't qualify for any income-based programs. Or they'll just lose the paperwork. And so you'll have a parent or a grandparent who will believe that they have to still make these 10-year payments, 10-year standard payments that are very high for their income, exceedingly high, and they can't make those. So they are starting to fear that they can never retire. They're starting to put off their health care expenses, going to the doctor, getting prescriptions to try to keep this student loan up to date. And the problem is that these folks will qualify for an income-based. When your income is low, that's exactly what the federal programs are for. And so, again, one of the things that the servicers are not always sharing with their borrowers is that they can change their loan types to be eligible for more programs. And that's one of the things that we see with Parent Plus loans. Straight up, they're not eligible for income-based. But if you convert them to a direct loan, they are. They're only eligible for one of the half dozen or so out there. But it's a pretty good program. It's not the best, but it's much, much better than what they're being asked to pay.
Right. Well, and having a shot at one program is better than having no shot at any program.
Exactly. And we've had clients who, one example, for instance, she was paying $1,400 in her low 60s, and we were able to show her how we could change her loan type, have her file a married filing separate return to exclude her spouse's income. Her husband owned a business, made pretty good money, but she did not, and then apply for this income-based payment. Her payment would go down substantially, $1,400 to very close to zero.
Wow.
And so she was practically in tears when I shared this with her, and her servicer all along was saying there's no options for her. She has to still pay $1,400 every single month.
But that would be, are you extending the life of the loan by reducing the payment, or is there some forgiveness at some point?
Yeah, actually, that's a great question. You are not extending the loan because there is forgiveness. It's basically after a 25-year time period, anything that's not paid, whether it's accrued interest, unpaid principal, whatever it is gone. It's completely wiped away. Now, let's say, for instance, the person dies, they pass away during that time. The loan dies with them. It doesn't go into probate. Their husbands or heirs are not responsible. It's simply gone. And then finally, a parent or grandparent might become disabled or unable to work. And if that's the case, they can simply apply for an administrative discharge. It's not that hard to do. If you have a Social Security disability entitlement letter, it's sort of streamlined for you. So there's options that 25 years wouldn't even come to be. But let's say it does run out from age 62 to 85 or whatever the math is, it would be forgiven at that time.
So definitely, if you're out there and you've got student loans, or if you're out there with money that your parents borrowed or grandparents borrowed, definitely give Christie a buzz. She can help you navigate through those waters in terms of how to maybe reduce the burden of the Parent Plus loans or other student loans that you have to try to make your budget easier. But the other thing that I wanted to talk to you about here was Fannie Mae, and I have a background in mortgage foreclosure. That's how I got into bankruptcy, was having to do mortgage foreclosures, both for the lenders and now defense in terms of the borrowers. And so I saw when Fannie Mae came out with the rules that said, if you have a student loan, you can wrap that student loan into a mortgage refinance. I am very much against that for all kinds of reasons, but I think you have a lot more experience in student loans than I do, so I wanted to get your take on it.
Well, from your real estate background, I can understand why you're against them, and there's many reasons against them, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to share some information today. Initially, it sounds great, right? A lot of millennials were complaining that they have such burdensome student loans they can't afford to get into home ownership, and that's causing a lot of concerns as demographically into how many people then are not going to be able to buy homes or are just going to be forever renters. But you have to be careful what you wish for, because these programs, you're basically taking a loan with no collateral and you're collateralizing it. You're adding your house so that if you don't pay the student loan, they can foreclose on your house, take any down payment, any equity you might have, and so forth. But the biggest concern that I have about these loans is who they're being marketed to. The program came out mostly, I think, because of the concern that young borrowers, millennials, weren't going to be able to buy houses. But let's say, for instance, they start marketing these to our older Americans. You've got a person who's going to probably qualify for income-based payment. And when you go on Social Security, that payment for your student loan is probably going to be between $0 and $50. Very, very low, very, very affordable. But if they instead downsize their larger home, all the kids have left, they move into a smaller home, they have some good equity. Let's say that they take a mortgage on that house to pay off a Parent Plus loan, for instance. Now, all of a sudden, they're no longer eligible for income-based repayment. They're no longer eligible for any kind of disability discharge. And instead, if they don't make that payment, their house is gone. And so there's a substantial risk for older Americans in particular.
So are these Fannie Mae loans first mortgages or second mortgages or either or?
Probably either or, but I see most of the marketing, I think, going to first mortgages.
Because that was going to be my comment is I totally agree with you. You take an unsecured debt, the student loan, and you secure it with the house. And so if you're not able to make your house payment, we've got some options in terms of loan modifications and whatnot, but you don't have, like you said, the forgiveness programs and the income-based repayment programs and all that kind of stuff. The other thing is student loans, at least for now, in most circumstances are not dischargeable in bankruptcy. But if this becomes a first mortgage, it would also not be necessarily dischargeable in bankruptcy unless you were giving up your primary residence.
Yes, there could be issues that change the mix a little bit in bankruptcy court with these loans.
Okay. So is there any good reason to do one of these Fannie Mae student loans?
Well, if you are like a younger borrower and you can't get into a house because you do owe substantial student loan debt, most of the federal loans are accruing interest at 6.8%. And you can get a home mortgage for about 4%, second mortgage for around 3 to 4, something like that. So if you feel, and I know it's hard to, have be able to look into the future to know what's going to happen. But if you are making a lot of money and you don't think that you're ever going to need to take advantage of the income-based debt forgiveness programs, if you're exceedingly healthy and can't possibly imagine yourself ever becoming disabled, then you might consider refinancing and wrapping this student loan into a mortgage. Because it would save you quite a bit of money in interest, but you're giving up so many federal protections that I don't know if it's worth it. You'd really want to do a calculation as to how much money you are saving. And the new tax laws and any changes to our tax laws might make a difference too. Right now we have a mortgage interest deduction, and that could change in the future.
Yeah, that may be going away.
Yeah, so if that goes away, that should play a role too, because normally someone who would normally want to have a mortgage and be able to deduct that interest, where normally student loans, when I graduated, I could never deduct my student loans. There's a cap as to how much you can make to do that. And while I graduated during a time they were very affordable, I was never able to write them off, the interest. And that made me most unhappy.
I'm in the same scenario. I've never been able to deduct student loan interest. I'm over the cap. I'm over the limit. So, well, wow, I really appreciate you being back on the podcast, Christie. Let everybody know if they do want to contact you about the Parent Plus loans, or about if they have questions about analyzing. I may look into this Fannie Mae loan product. How does a listener get a hold of you?
Well, the easiest way is go on our website. It's ChristieArkovich.com, CHRISTIE, and then it's ARKOVICH.com. We have a number of resources on there. We have a free book, How to Take Your Life Back from Your Student Loans. It's very popular. It goes through a lot of different things that we can do for folks. And these are tried and true type of strategies. We do this each and every day for our clients. It's not the rare case, but it's each and every day we're generally able to greatly reduce student loan debt. Usually not eliminate it entirely, although that can happen, but we're just seeking to reduce it and not extend it into the future, but reduce it forever, basically. But one last point on the Fannie Mae program.
Yeah.
The other interesting thing is that when you sign off on a mortgage and a note, a lot of times these notes are by both borrowers, husband and wife, spouse.
Right.
And so you're putting your spouse on the hook for your student loans that they currently are not liable for. So that's another big thing that they haven't really addressed and explained as well as I'd like to see out there. But our website has a lot of information about changes in programs. We have a blog that I'm very active in. We try to blog new events, new things every 2-3 times a week or so. And my email is on the website, of course. And we do offer free consultations for anyone seeking to reduce debt, whether it's mortgage, whether it's a bankruptcy, whether it's student loans, you name it.
Well, cool. I appreciate you being back on the show, and I apologize to the listeners. I'm dealing with the hopefully the end of a little bit of a bug here, and so I can even hear as I record, my voice is getting progressively worse and worse and worse. But we are at the end of this week's episode, so you won't have to deal with that super scratchy voice anymore. Thank you, Christie, for being a guest on the show again. And I look forward. We've got some more content here to record, so I want you to tune in to another episode, to next week's episode of the Crushing Debt podcast.
If you have questions that you think would make a great topic for a future episode, please email Sean or connect with us on social media. Sean Yesner and Yesner Law PL are Florida licensed attorneys. The information contained in this week's episode is not a substitute for legal advice. Your situation may differ, especially if you are located somewhere other than the state of Florida. If you have questions, please contact our office or contact a local attorney. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast.